This digital city walk is part of a collaboration between the Talking Objects Lab and Dekoloniale Memory Culture in the City. On behalf of the whole Dekoloniale team, I'd like to thank the curators for giving us the chance to document the incredible knowledge of 4 Berlin activists who have served the field of decolonization admirably. The walk consists of four stops, which are presented by Dr. Paulette Reed Anderson. She is a historian living in Berlin, and her research focus is the German colonial history, in particular the colonial central administration, which was located here in Berlin, close to his office actually. Second expert we have invited is Israel Kaunatschike. He is a Herero activist in Berlin and spokesperson for the NGO Alliance No Amnesty on Genocide. Our third activist and expert today is Mnyaka Zururu Mboro. He's a Bachaga activist from Tanzania, and he's the founder and board member of Decolonize Berlin. And last but not least, our colleague from Dekoloniale, Christian Kopp, who is a historian and activist. He is in charge of decoloniale histories and representation, and furthermore, he is a co-founder of Berlin Postkolonial. I hope you enjoy the tour, and thank you.
Ich heiße Israel Kaunatschike, ich bin der Herero-Aktivist in Deutschland, in ganz Deutschland, und ich bin auch Mitglied der Bündnis Völkermord verjährt nicht. Und wir sind nach der Kolonialspurensuche. Und hier stehe gerade hinter mir der ehemalige Deutsche Bank Gebäude. Und da ist es sehr schwer zu sehen, das sind auch noch Reliefs von damaligen kolonisierte Hereros und noch andere Völker. Und wie wir wissen von der Geschichte her, die Deutsche Bank war beteiligt an dem Völkermord auch gegen die Hereros und Namas. Und vor allen Dingen, die war beteiligt an dem Eisenbahnbau in damalige Deutsch-Südwestafrika. Das heißt, Eisenbahn war es sehr, sehr wichtig, um an die Bodenschätze ranzukommen. In Tsumeb, zum Beispiel, in Tsumeb ist eine große Kupfermine und andere Bodenschätze, also Mineralien und alle solche Sachen. Und darum sagen wir auch, dass die Deutsche Bank auch beteiligt war an dem Völkermord gegen die Hereros und Namas. Und das war der erste 20. Jahrhundert Völkermord damals. Und 2001 hat unsere Schifferie Rocco, die auch nicht mehr unter uns ist, damals auch Deutschland verklagt in den USA, unter anderem auch die Deutsche Bank. Und diese Geschichte geht auch nicht zu Ende, weil wir immer noch von Deutschland Reparation und Anerkennung fordern, was Deutschland auch nie so bereit ist, das anzuerkennen, und die Hereros sind aus diesem Prozess, also das heißt, die Vertreter der Hereros, die wahre Vertreter der Hereros und Namas sind aus diesen Verhandlungen ausgeschlossen. Und darum lernen wir diese ganze sogenannte Einverständnis von Deutschland, dass Namibia heute 1,1 Billionen Milliarden Europa angeboten hat. Aber wir als Nachfahren der Hereros und Namas, wir lehnen das kategorisch ab, weil das ist einfach für uns ist Peanuts, kann man so sagen, dass es für uns überhaupt nicht bringt. Und solange wir nicht dabei sind, als gleichberechtigte Vertreter, also direkte Vertreter mit der deutschen Regierung, sind wir nicht einverstanden, und wir lehnen das ab. und auch in Namibia, die Opposition lehnt das auch ab. Und das heißt, ich rate Herrn Steinmeier und Herrn Maas, einfach in Berlin zu bleiben, weil dann sonst muss ich sich sehr warm anziehen. Wami umgramene po wo shiwana me hiro wan doishi pumba kuramamba kongot feya njengwi kuno banga njiyo van doishi ombanga nyija itungo o mahina okiendako gatusho kosume pogulamo swako munda no wandu mbawe tungu bare wakaendu mbarimo molo kampa ndo da dutusho concentration kamba winokusha on Deutsche Bank njimi henji noho yari orupa rumwe ro dwari mwinjo horomendio vandoshi orubedento kushait okutunini kida no kude po vandu vetu oputwa loku kutfaranjo horomente yovandoshi no Deutsche Bank osikando shifarirwa ko shafarire ko lokota ko America okusho on Deutsche Bank iso kutututa umano ondiro mondiro Ovaherero no vakwena so okushambirimba na inoho matu tfara shurwa shetu kwa murungu.
My name is Christian Kopp. I'm an activist and historian for the NGO Berlin Postkolonial, which I, together with some friends, have founded in 2007. We're standing in the so-called Mohrenstraße. We call it M Street, as it is a derogative and discriminating term used. And this street will soon be renamed. It will be named after Anton Wilhelm Amo. So we will have an Anton Wilhelm Amo Street. Anton Wilhelm Amo was the first black academic, the first professor of law and philosophy of African descent in Germany. And not only this, he was brought as a child of 4 or 5 years to Europe as an enslaved person. So you see, the story of the street is reflected in his name, but the perspective on it is changed, and it is now honoring black persons and black prominent people here in the street, and not anymore discriminating them. To understand why this renaming was necessary, it is important to know that the black community, many activists have for decades struggled to rename the street. As they said, the existing name M Street is discriminating for them and reminding Berlin's black community of the time of the enslavement trade and of the enslavement of black Africans here in Europe as well. So to understand their problem with the street name, it is necessary to look into the history of the street, which is revealing and telling quite a lot about the history of the black community in Berlin. So we have to go back to the time of the early 18th century, the late 17th century, when the Electorate Brandenburg, which later on became the Kingdom of Prussia, was deeply involved in the enslavement trade as well as other big powers like the Netherlands, Great Britain and France, Portugal of course. So the Brandenburgers and the Prussian rulers decided to send an expedition to Western Africa and even to build a castle which is existing until today, which was called Great Fredericksburg. Today it is Princestown in Ghana. So they had their own enslavement fortress at the West African coast. But not only this, that they were involved in the deportation of at least 20,000 Africans to the Caribbean countries, to the Americas. They were also trying to ship and to deport African people, especially young men, to Berlin to demonstrate to the world that they are global rulers, that they are colonial rulers, and that they have the power to control and to rule people from all over the world. So it is in the late 17th century and the early 18th century that we see the first black, especially young men, here serving at the courts of the nobility. This was so, there's paintings proving this. It was so in the Berlin Castle, which is now becoming the Humboldt Forum, but also very close to this street, M Street, where there is another street called Markgrafenstraße. And it is named Markgrafenstraße because the Markgraves were the half-brothers of the king, and they had their palaces along this street, the Markgrafen Street. And we know from parish registers that all of them had black servants at their court. So this is an area where in the early 18th century, when the street was named, it was quite a normal thing to see black servants being here in the street. Later on, this name of the street was inspiration for other people to use black bodies for the demonstration of their own power as well. So, for instance, now we are standing here at the underground station in Mohrenstraße, but there used to be a palace of one of these Markgraves as well. It was the son of one of these three having their palaces in the Markgrafen Street. One was here, it was Prince Karl, and at the very place where I stay there were two bigger than life-size statues of black servants, black Africans, hardly clothed, portraits as wild people, standing in front of this palace. This was in the 18th century, and it was taking up the name Mohrenstraße as an inspiration for this kind of architecture here. Again, with the impulse to prove that the global influence one has. Later on in the 19th, and especially then in the 20th century, in 1918, there was known to everybody in Berlin a company called Zarotti producing chocolate. It was at one time, it was even the biggest chocolate factory in the world, I've heard. And the most prominent sign or icon of this chocolate company was a small boy called the Zarotti Moor. A small black child serving white colonialists with colonial goods, with chocolate, with cacao, with coffee. And this factory had its first building here in the M Street, in the Mohrenstraße. So it was inspiration for, this is at least what the company is telling, that it was inspiration for this icon of the small boy. So you see, it was taken up again and again over the centuries, this picture, this image, this colonial racist image of young Africans being happy to serve white people, white rulers, white colonial rulers, with goods from all over the world. And this doesn't even end at this place. I told you about the palace of Prince Karl, and this was later on used by Joseph Goebbels, which was the propaganda minister for the National Socialist regime. He took the palace as his seat, and it was the building for the ministry, for the propaganda ministry, or Ministry of Propaganda and Popular Education, as it was called. And he was responsible for closely observing the film industry, the movie industry. And there was no time in German history when there were so many colonial, imperialist and racist movies were produced. So very often we have black actors in these movies, we find them as well, playing the same, very often the same servant roles as in the 18th century, in the 19th century later on. Being just status, being objects rather than subjects, having to play roles like as if they were stupid people, and always in the role of servants of white people. And one of these actors, which is maybe one of the most famous of them, was Bayume Mohametusen from East Africa. He used to live in Berlin. You can find him in many movies, in minor roles, often playing the servant again, the African servant, or a wild guy, not civilized yet, as it was portrayed. And he was suspected of having an affair with a white lady during one of the movie productions in Munich. So he was caught and imprisoned by the secret police, and he was brought to the concentration camp in Sachsenhausen, where he was killed in 1944. So he's maybe one of the more known and rather prominent victims of National Socialism, of the black victims of National Socialism. And you see how this logic of, degrading black people was driven to the peak during National Socialism, and it had a kind of deadly logic in it.
Watazamaji, kwa jina ninaitwa Mnyaka Sururu Mboro kutoka Tanzania, Mchaga wa mkoa wa Kilimanjaro, na ni mwalimu na ninaishi hapa Berlin kwa muda mrefu tayari. Lakini katika kuishi kwangu hapa Berlin, si tu kuishi, bali nilianza kuhusika katika kumbukumbu zetu za zamani za utawala wa Kijerumani. Tusisahau, tulitawaliwa na Wajerumani kuanzia mwaka 1884 mpaka mwisho wa vita kuu ya dunia mwaka 1918 tarehe 30 Novemba. Na tusije tukasahau, Wajerumani walioyatenda yalikuwa ni mengi sana. Kulikuwepo na vita wakati wote wa utawala wao, na mababu zetu waliuawa. Si kuuawa tu katika vita. Unavyoona hapa, nipo hapa, kulikuwepo na jengo hili la kumbukumbu la ethnolojia na antropolojia lilizoanzishwa na bwana ajulikanaye kama Bastian Adolf. Jengo hili ni kwamba lengo lake ilikuwa ni kukusanya vitu vya kitamaduni, tuviite kwa Kiswahili vinyago, na vitu vingine ambavyo vinahusu utamaduni wetu katika eneo lote la bara la Afrika. Na bara la Afrika zaidi haswa katika makoloni yao ambayo kama nilivyosema, Tanzania, Rwanda na Burundi, Namibia, Rwanda, Cameroon na Togo. Jengo hili ndio linavyoonekana hapa, ndivyo jinsi lilivyoanzishwa. Halafu hapa tunaona ndio ndani kwenye jengo wakati walivyoanza kukusanya kumbukumbu zetu za utamaduni na kuziweka katika jengo hili mpaka mwishoni likawa limejaa, halina nafasi hata kidogo. Na huyu bwana haswa anasema kwamba kazi aliyokuwa anaifanya ni kutunza kumbukumbu, kwa sababu mataifa mengi katika bara la Afrika walikuwa wanaangamia. Kwa hiyo aliona azitunze hizi kumbukumbu, akisahau kwamba yeye anatuibia, na sio kwamba tungeweza kuangamizwa wote. Mpaka leo tupo, tunamshukuru Mungu. Here I'm staying in front of this information body which shows the building of the Museum of Ethnology and Anthropology, which was started with Mr. Adolf Bastian. His aim, really, it was to collect the cultural objects to be reserved in this building. And why he did so? Because he thought that most of nations or communities, especially in Africa, will be totally eliminated or diminished through colonial wars. We don't have to forget, even the building itself was started in 1884. And this is how it did look from outside, and we can see from inside, it is the collections are already in there where almost they couldn't have enough place. But the bitter thing, it is that we don't have to forget the human remains also were preserved in this museum. And these human remains were our ancestors in Africa. And here I'm talking especially in the German colonial countries in Africa, talking about German East Africa, which nowadays it is Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi, German Southwest Africa, which today it is Namibia, Cameroon and Togo. So, because of the time, I will just only mention what really happened in Tanzania. It was a big war which started in 1905 and ended in 1907, known as Maji Maji Rebellion in English, where I really feel ashamed when I'm saying Maji Maji Rebellion, because my ancestors were net rebels. They were fighting for the right of their country. And you find in this war, more than 20 communities came together to fight the colonial rule of Germany, because they were tired of their brutality and of being forced to work in the plantations. And at that time, over 300,000 people died. Not just only died, then you find also some of them were hanged, especially those who were on the ruling positions, and their heads were chopped off and sent here in Germany, and they were preserved in this building for racial researchers. Up to now at home, we are really crying for these human remains to be brought back so that we can bury them according to our tradition, according to our culture, because we do feel that still things is not normal so long they are not back to be reburied in Africa. They have to be brought back. And as my work here in Berlin, since for quite many years, is that we found we have to have an instrument. That's why in 2007, we found Berlin Post-Colonial, where also I am in the executive. Thank you.
My name is Paulette Reed Anderson. I'm a historian and live in Berlin. My research area is German colonial history, in particular the colonial central administration that was located here in Berlin. Mein Name ist Paulette Reed Anderson. Ich bin Historikerin und wohne in Berlin. Mein Forschungsgebiet ist die deutsche Kolonialgeschichte, insbesondere die Kolonialzentralverwaltung, die sich hier in Berlin befand. We are standing in front of the historical plaque at Wilhelmstrasse 62, which states in part, against the background of the Versailles peace negotiations, Berlin resident Martin Kwame Adibobe, originally from Douala, Cameroon, delivered a petition addressed to the Weimar National Assembly and signed by 17 men from West and East Africa who lived in Germany to the Colonial Office on June 19, 1919. In a document submitted on June 27, 1919, the group enumerated complaints and 32 specific conditions necessary to live amicably with the new German nation state. The core demands were equal rights and independence. Pictured on the plaque are two of the signatories, Martin Kwame Adibobe and Madachi bin Sharufu. Bin Sharufu was originally from Tanga, now Tanzania, and he gave public lectures in support of the complaints and 32 specific conditions enumerated in the document in autumn 1919. The building, Wilhelmstrasse 62, which was demolished after the Second World War, was from 1905 until 1920 the location of the German colonial central administration. The plaque further states, the Dibobe petition, which the Weimar government suppressed, was one of the most important documents expressing the African diaspora's collective resistance in Germany against the imperial colonial empire's systematic breaches of international and human rights. The initiative to erect the historical plaque at this location was led by the civil society organization Berlin Post-Colonial and was supported by the Berlin government. The plaque was unveiled in July 2019. This historical plaque represents a significant counter-narrative to German and Eurocentric colonial symbols.